Has a friend or family member of yours ever insinuated that certain minority groups are more lazy or more hardworking than others? Maybe you're an educator and you've seen this in some of your classroom settings. I want to offer some of my own experiences as tools for you. I want you to feel more prepared when addressing the ideas around bias. How being able to see yourself in your mentors can have a lasting effect on your development. So, let's talk about bias. Learned bias. You can make the argument that it comes from your family, that it comes from the part of the country that you're living in, but I want to focus on that learned part because I do think that a lot of the prejudice that we carry into our adult lives is learned at a young age. That's not to say that we're being taught racist or prejudiced things, but rather that the way that we are taught to learn about things is overly judgmental and absolute. Dweck says, in a fixed mindset, students believe their basic abilities, their intelligence, their talents are just fixed traits. They have a certain amount and that's that. And then their goal becomes to look smart all the time and never look dumb. In a growth mindset, students understand that their talents and abilities can be developed through effort, good teaching, and persistence. They don't necessarily think everyone's the same or anyone can be Einstein, but they believe everyone can get smarter if they work at it. Now, a lot of educators should be pretty familiar with the concept of the fixed versus the growth mindset. If you start to think about this belief that people are born with a certain inherent talent or ability, you keep pulling that thread and you get to the core. As a young educator of color, I'm constantly battling against imposter syndrome and just feeling like I don't belong. Why is it so hard? Well, part of why it's hard is just because there aren't a lot of teachers of color. I was told at a very young age in the public school district that I was a part of that math and science were just never going to be my thing, that was not something that I excelled at, and that I should lean into other interests. Being told something like that at a young age has a detrimental effect on the development of that person as a student in both school and a student in life. The messaging that students receive at school when they're 12 years old doesn't necessarily make them into the person that they will be for the rest of their life, but it does form the self-narrative of how you see yourself for the rest of your life. In teaching a student to have a fixed mindset about themselves, you actually plant the seed that then grows into the tree that is racism. To tell someone that this is who you are and this is who you were born to be immediately causes people to start to turn that fixed mindset outwardly, i.e., if I'm a smart person, then there must obviously be dumb people. Now, I want to remind everyone that I'm just speaking from my own perspective and I cannot speak for anyone else. But I did have a lot of experiences growing up. So after being told that I would not be able to achieve anything in math or science, I immediately started leaning into some of my other interests, just thinking I better stay in my lane. The same teacher that taught my math and science classes was also my English teacher. One day, I totally bombed a science quiz. I think I got a D on it. And I remember being pretty bummed about the grade, but I'd actually become a pretty decent writer. And I had an English paper due the next day. The prompt was, write about one of your heroes. So I'd thought about it and I had grown up watching the Denzel Washington movie Malcolm X. As a result, I got really interested in Malcolm X and my parents would tell me about him. I was reading about him a lot and doing a lot of research at the school library. So I turned in this paper and I remember being super excited about being proud of my work. The next day, I got it back with a big fat red F on the top of it. I remember thinking, what the heck? I worked really hard on this. So I brought the paper up to her after class and I gave it to her and I said, I really thought I did well on this. I'm just confused about why it's an F. She took a look at me and then she looked down at the paper and then she looked back at me and she said, there's no way you wrote this. I didn't know what to say to her. I took the paper back and was really confused and I went home and I told my parents. That was when I realized what had happened. She had made the assumption that there was no way that the same person that failed that science quiz could also have worked really hard on something. You told me I was bad at math and science, so I stopped raising my hand in math and science class. The problem is that when you teach these absolutes, it reinforces this idea that the world is black and white. People don't change. There is no room for growth in that mindset. I'm going to take this a step further and suggest that when you teach children of color that the world is defined by these absolutes, they start to reinforce this idea that they are lesser and that they will never be able to achieve the things that the people that don't look like them in majority white spaces are able to achieve because of this endowed privilege. On top of the systemic racism and the everyday struggles of being a person of color in this country, you're also fighting the internal battle of, am I worthy? Am I enough? When you start listening to that voice of doubt, that little thing that's reminding you that you're bad at this stuff, and there's other people that are just going to be way better at it than you, and there's nothing you can do to change that, it becomes really easy to not make it to that first job interview, to pick up that liquor bottle, to smoke that joint, whatever it may be. It's this fixed mindset that is the explanation for every stereotype in this country. There are so many things that are predetermined about our lives that place our little pin in the appropriate section of the privilege bulletin board. If we could just take care of some of this stuff in the school system, we would all stand to benefit. School is the first place that we learn about how to address authority figures that aren't our parents. If I can't see myself reflected in my mentors, I'm half as likely to pay attention to their authority, therefore twice as likely to fail. I keep hearing this come up around the idea of defunding the police. The idea here is not to take away a cop's salary, but maybe the police department doesn't need 3 new helicopters next year. Looking at you, Nashville. And maybe we could stand to have more professional development for teachers in our school districts, more support and salary for educators, more teachers of color employed, more college counselors of color, better after school programs with better staff and tutoring available to students in underserved communities who aren't able to have that private SAT tutor come over to their house. So the next time someone tells you that the way to solve these problems is to throw more money at policing and to further divide communities based on socioeconomic class, I challenge you to see the full picture and adopt the same growth mindset that's so beneficial to educators in your own education around justice.